All right, welcome back. Let's get right to it. It's around 1900s in America. We've got laws that enforce segregation. What were those laws called? Jim Crow laws, exactly. And so if you're an African American, you want more freedom, more, equal rights in society and under the law. But there's two people and two ways of kind of going about getting it. So the first person we're talking about is Booker T. Washington. Born a slave, he's an autodidact. What does that mean? It means self-taught, okay? And he says, let's work, do a good job, set an example, and we'll gradually get equality. Okay, work hard, set an example, and we'll become equal over time. Okay, that's what he's going to advise. This is contrasted with W.E.B. Du Bois, who is born in the North, has access to top flight education, and says, no, we should just fight discrimination right now. If you don't, if something's broke, you don't wait to fix it, you fix it right away. If something's wrong, that's not justice to try to fix it over time. It's justice to fix it right now. Does that make sense? And I want you to see too, why it might not be a perfect example, but later on in the civil rights movement, you'll get Martin Luther King and you'll get Malcolm X, and they both are pushing for more rights, but they're doing it in different ways. And so here's an example of different thoughts, but they both have the same goal. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's a quick video about W.E.B. Du Bois and about the NAACP.
One of the first moments where Du Bois comes onto the national stage is the brewing controversy between his ideas about racial progress and how to move the race forward, and the leading African-American figure of that time period, the late 19th and early 20th century, Booker T. Washington. In the beginning, they agreed on many points about the importance of education and moving the race forward. It turns out, though, that because Du Bois was northern-born and had access to some of the best schools in New England and really was encouraged to think broadly, it's been part of his elite graduate education, being trained in Berlin, working with Max Weber. By contrast to Booker T. Washington, who was self-educated, a very gifted and talented man, but he was born as a slave. That fundamental difference certainly shaped their sense of change over time. The life that Booker T. Washington eventually led as the leading, most recognized figure of African American society meant that his expectations for what the white race was willing to do on behalf of black people were very different than of Du Bois. You could say Du Bois was a utopian idealist in some respects, and Booker T. Washington was a pragmatist, better known as an accommodationist. And so it set up an ongoing debate. Eventually, Booker T. Washington's program sustained the ethos of Jim Crow America because it was about black people working, but on white people's terms. It was about a lack of political enfranchisement because black people were subject to poll taxes and literacy tests and the inability to vote. And it was ultimately about a form of second-class citizenship that was segregated America. In this regard, Du Bois did see that real change, fundamental change, living up to the real promises of racial democracy in America, depended upon agitation, depended upon a grasp for power.
The NAACP. On February 12, 1909, what is now the nation's oldest and largest grassroots civil rights organization, was formed. The NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, has been a driving force in fighting race-based discrimination in the United States since its founding. In 1909, racial injustices were common. Segregation was legal in many parts of the United States. Employment discrimination was common, and voting rights were often denied. People of color across the country had to live with the fear of racial violence and lynching. And so, the NAACP was formed, built on the ideals of another group, the Niagara Movement. W.E.B. Du Bois, along with 29 other prominent African Americans, started the Niagara Movement in 1905. They met near Niagara Falls and wrote a manifesto calling for equal civil rights, the end of racial discrimination, and the full recognition of humanity for people of color. In 1909, many white liberals in New York City joined with some of the Niagara Movement's black intellectual leaders, and from that group, the NAACP was born. In addition to W.E.B. Du Bois, other NAACP founders included renowned civil rights leaders Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell. The NAACP's mission has been to achieve a fully integrated society with equal rights for all. Its national leadership has always been interracial, even though the greater membership has been mostly African American. To achieve its mission, the NAACP has not only focused on using the legal system to challenge discrimination, but also on convincing all people of the need for racial equality through speeches, organizing, and legal advocacy. Since its inception, the NAACP has had a long list of legal accomplishments and successes. The NAACP's first challenge was fighting Jim Crow laws, which maintained legal segregation. In 1915, the NAACP was instrumental in outlawing the Grandfather Clause, which allowed white people to get around literacy tests that were used to prevent people of color from voting in many states. From 1920 to 1938, the organization flew a flag outside its New York City offices with the words, "A man was lynched yesterday," to call attention to the rampant lynching occurring in the United States. In 1954, the NAACP's chief counsel, Thurgood Marshall, successfully argued the case of Brown v. Board of Education before the Supreme Court, ending the legal segregation of schools. During the Civil Rights Movement, the NAACP co-organized the March on Washington in 1963, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. The NAACP lobbied for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which made it illegal to deny people the right to vote based on their race. Today, the NAACP remains actively committed to fighting discrimination. Its scope has widened to include fighting inequality in economics, healthcare, education, voter empowerment, and the criminal justice system. To this day, the NAACP continues to serve as an important legal advocate for all civil rights issues.
Okay, welcome back. So Ida B. Wells is sickened, and she's going to protest these lynchings, which are horrendous events in the South and other parts of the country. And she's going to say, let's boycott the streetcars. Let's boycott things. If we group together and use our power together, we can affect change. That, again, is going to be part of the basis of the foundation of the civil rights movement coming up 60 years later. Does that make sense? Okay. So when we eventually talk about the civil rights movement, it's not like it comes out of nowhere. It's built on these events. Does that make sense? Excellent. Okay, here we go. There's a famine in Mexico and immigration from Mexico increases. What I take from this is that regardless, your book talks about barrios and enclaves, but regardless of what minority you are, you're going to stick together. So, it was East LA. That's where, that was the Hispanic side of town. But you have little parts of town where you're going to stay with your relatives or stay with your friends or stay with people that have your customs, your same culture, your same language. And so that's how you get these little pockets in the big cities, okay? Asian America, what does annexed mean? Added, okay? We add Hawaii, all right? I'm not going to make you read about separate schools, but they do have separate schools. And then also, there's racism based on the color of your skin, but then there's also prejudice based upon your religion, okay? So we have to overcome that, and that's what this is talking about in the 1900s. Here's where we're at. So I know this lesson was short and sweet, but that's it for the unit. You got a small quiz tomorrow. Have a great weekend.